Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Fullback Dive, brought to you by the good people at the Roto Street Journal, paving your way to fantasy glory, acting as your lead blocker to fantasy excellence, making all your football-related fantasies come true. We're coming at you again. It's the middle of the day. We're sharp. You've gotten used to this. Those of you that have been tuning in, you're probably a little bit spoiled by these lunchtime distractions that we're providing to you. We're, of course, hitting every division in the NFL. Now, granted, it's late June. Things could change, but this is a great sneak peek as to where the Wolf, and a little bit me, see these pieces of these various teams helping you, hurting you, being, great best ball pieces, anything like that for the upcoming season, which is actually getting closer than you probably think. I'm your host, Matt the Truth Jones. With me, as always, the Wolf of Roto Street himself, and we're going to be diving into the NFC West today. Wolf, how you doing?
Doing great. Truth, fantastic division to project out. I had a ton of fun this morning. There's some divisions that are just more fun than others. And the more and more every team I went through was like, this team has DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. This team has Kittle, CMC, and Ayuk and Debo. And then the next one, it's Cooper Kupp. And how many yards is he going to go through? So it was one of those divisions. Sometimes you get to the South and it's just like, I don't like any of these guys. But this is a fun one. And I can't wait to talk about it because we've got a bunch of studs to dive into.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one too. It's a fun fantasy division. I believe the last division up that we haven't done is the NFC South, which is something nobody's probably looking forward to. So enjoy this one today because there are a lot of pieces, even for some teams that we don't think are going to do particularly well this year. There's pieces on every one of these teams that are worth listening to, worth learning about, and probably worth owning pieces of various teams like that. We're going to dive into it with a pretty interesting team, a team that did extremely well last year, went to the NFC Championship game, and I think went 13-4, but they're projected obviously to be good this year. But there have been some significant changes that are worth talking about, i.e. Jimmy G is out the door. We're talking about the San Francisco 49ers, of course. We are on a hard cap to finish this thing, 12:40, 12:45. So the Wolf is going to largely blow through this stuff, and I'm going to jump up hopefully near the end. And if I got anything to say, I'll say it then. We're going to try to keep the flow going with the Wolf. So you're just going to have to put up with that, people. Go ahead, Wolf.
All righty, yeah, I'll try to rip through them. And then, as you said, anything that sounds off to you, or anything that catches your eye and you're like, I like that, let me know after I get through the team. But I'll kind of run through these like I did yesterday on the solo show and just highlight, starting with the team level, then the market share, then the player level inputs. Of course, we're starting here with the 49ers, and I project them very similarly to how they've been under Kyle Shanahan, a near 50-50 split in most of his years, a little bit below average in league total plays, but I actually have them going above that because a lot of the reports so far are they expect the Niners offense to be more aggressive this year, largely based on the fact that Christian McCaffrey will now have a full offseason, says the beat writers, that they have a ton of faith in Brock Purdy after what he did as a rookie, and they think he can take another step forward and really engineer more no-huddle type of situations. And then they also mentioned losing Robbie Gould could put this team in more situations. They have to go for it on fourth down, so keeping more plays there for the offense as well. So I did bump them up. I kept that kind of 50-50 split going, but with a few more plays than what we've typically seen in a Kyle Shanahan offense is where I bumped that up. And that obviously, as I said at the top, has a lot to do with Brock Purdy. And I know entering the offseason, there's a lot of question marks. Is Trey Lance got to come on and in after they gave up all this investment to go get him and all the dynamic traits he brings? And certainly there is the argument that this offense could be even more dangerous with Trey Lance, but then there's also that high floor, that stability with Brock Purdy after he came in, led this team. They already were a great team, but he continued to plow forward. And who knows what would have happened against the Eagles there in the playoffs. I still think the Eagles probably take that game, but ultimately Purdy would have made it more competitive. There's no doubt about that. So I think this whole offense definitely continues another step forward after what we saw in Purdy. We'll talk about how he helped every single ship here rise. Other than Ayuk, he stayed about similar to what he did, but every other player benefited greatly from the stability that Brock Purdy brought. He had multiple touchdowns in all but one game that he played. So I really, really like Brock Purdy. And as you can see, I have him projected pretty well here, even in a lower volume passing attack, bottom half in the league in pass attempts. I think he'll be very, very efficient, 4,281 yards, 32 touchdowns, near 70% completion rate, which is what we saw last year. He protected the ball very well. So 11 might even be high for this kid. There is the risk that, that NFL people now have tape on him and he's not that special and suddenly he's going to get figured out. But ultimately, the thing that he's lauded for is his high IQ, his quick decision making, his ability to read the defenses and find the right mismatch. And Kyle Shanahan knows how to do that better than anyone. He just needs the guy to deliver the rock and make the reads the right way. He doesn't need a dynamic guy like Trey Lance to have this offense just be a machine down the field. So I don't think that you'd have to figure out Kyle Shanahan and Brock Purdy, in my opinion, to get this offense stalled out. So I think that's a good sized aerial pie for not a ton of pass attempts. I think they're going to be very, very efficient, as we've seen historically with Kyle Shanahan, but even a level further here, as a lot of the beat writers are projecting as well, based on the early camp practices. Now, how will it all shake out? That 4,200. I guess we'll start with the ground game. There's a little guy named Christian McCaffrey here that might be of interest to you guys and fantasy owners. I do think he definitely deserves to be the starter. I just want to make sure too, this isn't me saying Brock Purdy is going to be the starter and I think he's the best. Every single person down to Adam Schefter has said he's the unanimous guy at this point, and that Trey Lance, Sam Darnold, they're battling it out for 2, but they think that Purdy is the now and the future of this team. So I really do feel pretty good about him being the guy, assuming he's healthy and doesn't just completely fall on his face. But let's move to the run game at this point for that little guy named CMC. Actually, you know what? I'd rather save him till the end. He's the cherry on top to this entire offense. And what he did once he got here was absolutely phenomenal. Back to his 2018 cheat code style season, we could see that again. But how do I expect that, 4,300 or so and 30 touchdowns of Brock Purdy to be distributed? Well, they have some really big mouths to feed, but I think it's going to be very concentrated to those 4 tops 5 mouths. And that's Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, and Christian McCaffrey. I have all of them right around 100 targets, which obviously all of them deserve that. They're all phenomenal talents, and they all can do so many different things with the ball, be so efficient. And so I actually have Ayuk leading the way here in terms of total targets. He was the wide receiver 1 last year. Some of that was because of Deebo Samuel. He missed some time. He just didn't look like Deebo Samuel for a good chunk of last year. But a lot of that is just Ayuk continued to take that next step last year. And all the reports so far in camp, all these beat writers and ESPN, they were given their surprise standout in every camp. And the guy wrote, Brandon Ayuk's my surprise standout. And that's not a bold thing, given that he led the team in receiving last year. But the standout piece of it was he has taken his game to such a different level this year. And again, he's already been phenomenal, but he's been taking his game to such a different level. I think everyone's going to be shocked at how much better this guy is. And that's a scary thought, given how good he has already been so far in his NFL career. I mean, Deebo Samuel himself saying you couldn't cover this guy in a phone booth with how he's moving out there. He was apparently the MVP of almost every single day, going deep after the catch, everything. He's in a contract year as well, so it seems like he really entered camp ready to go, ready to feast. So I love Brandon Ayuk. I think he's going to lead this team in targets, but the production will still be pretty spread out. 120 to him, 114 to Deebo. There's a lot of mouths, and they're all going to be fed well, but I see him getting 80 catches on his 120 targets for right around 1,100 yards and 8 TDs. With, again, if all those reports are coming true, maybe there's a ceiling for even more here. There is that idea that this offense could just blow up, like we saw with Kyle Shanahan leading that Falcons attack back in, when they lost to the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Had to toss that in there. We've seen offenses truly just explode under him, and maybe this is the piece. I don't know if Purdy can really engineer that level of an explosive offense, but you look at all these pieces. I mean, you got Deebo Samuel, who there's a lot of reason to expect a big bounce back from this guy. Have him getting 114 targets, and maybe he does end up leading the way ahead of Brandon Ayuk. There's some interesting trends on Deebo, where even with his down year last year, he still has, he's in the top 5 in terms of top 10 finishes over his last 2 years. Over almost 40% of his games have been in the top 10. Over half of those games have been a wide receiver 1, top 12. And he was apparently disgusted with his film, training much, much harder. He said, the contract distractions got the best of him. He admitted that it wasn't his best offseason, that he's gotten back to doing everything he did in the 2021 offseason before he had that monster season, was the wide receiver 3 in fantasy, averaging over 21 points per game. He was an absolute monster that season, and he says he's destined. He really wants to make sure he gets back there. There's a weird trend with Deebo. This doesn't really factor into my projections at all, but it is of just interesting note in odd years. So 2019 and 2021, he played 31 games. That was certainly his healthiest 2 seasons. He had 134 catches, 2,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, in addition to 11 rushing touchdowns on the ground as well. So 20 total touchdowns in those 2 seasons. And then you look at his even number seasons so far in his career, his passing receptions and nearly cut in half, only 1,000 yards compared to 2,200 yards and just 3 rushing touchdowns compared to 11. So for whatever reason, he has really spiked his production in odd years. I don't know why, but we're in an odd year. So, hey, if that trend continues, and it sounds like he's just like, yep, I'm getting back to my odd year phases. He recognizes it. He's been grinding. He really, really wants to get it done. He's sickened by what he did last year. So I'm ready to buy back into there. A lot of people saying, Debo, oh no, he's not going to see the rushing work now that McCaffrey's there. Well, I project him to be right in line. He's seen 11% and 13% rushing market share in back-to-back years. And with McCaffrey there, he actually saw an increase in carries per game compared to the games before McCaffrey arrived. He was at 3.4 carries per game with McCaffrey on the team. The year before that was 3.6, where he had that blow up, 8 touchdowns on the ground. So I think, 54 yards, 54 rushes rather, for right around, he's been at 6.2, 5.8 yards per carry. So I think he can rip another 300 plus on the ground. He's a great touchdown scorer when they get in close on some of those crazy designed plays. So I really think that's reasonable, in addition to some quality receiving totals, right around 1,200 total yards, right around 10 total touchdowns, with touches coming from every facet of the game. I think Debo does have a nice rebound, making him a great late 3rd, early 4th target in your drafts. But Ayuk, as I mentioned, right around there in production, and I think you get him around 2 or 3 later. The Debo, I like them both. I like stacking them up. I think it's great. But the one guy that benefited the most from having Brock Purdy was George Kittle. Both from a target share perspective, from an overall productivity standpoint, George Kittle really ate as soon as Brock Purdy went into the lineup. He leaned on his big tight end. In fact, he scored, George Kittle, 7 touchdowns in his 5 regular season games with Brock Purdy. And it wasn't just like one 4-touchdown monster. It was spread out. Looking at the game logs right now, 2 touchdowns, 2 touchdowns, 1 touchdown, 2 touchdowns. The only game he didn't score was Purdy's first start, in which they were just bending over the Buccaneers, led by Tom Brady. They run 35-7. They took the air out of the ball. He didn't need to keep throwing. So we didn't see much from Kittle that game, but every single other game, he was an absolute monster. 80% of his games with Brock Purdy was a tight end one. He also had a 5-catch, 100-yard day in the playoffs against the Cowboys as well. So this is definitely somebody that can be leaned upon he bumped up as soon as I did this research and saw just how much better he was with Brock Purdy. 18.6 points per game with Purdy versus 10.9 without him. I mean, eight points more. That's a huge spike with Brock Purdy. And as soon as I saw just how good he was with him, I bumped him right back up to tight end 4 with the ability to chase those big 3. Andrews, Hawkinson, and of course, Kelsey at the top. He won't catch, but this guy really, really lit it up with Brock Purdy. So all these ships did rise with Brock Purdy, other than, as I said, Ayuk did stay relatively the same, 13.5 versus 13.7 without Purdy. So he was good no matter who was throwing him the rock. He did average more catches and more yards per game, though. So if the touchdowns follow with Purdy, and if he is truly taking that next step, like people say, which I can't even imagine what that would look like given how good he's already been, I'm just so excited for every single one of these pass catchers. But as mentioned at the top, we got to save the main course here. And that's crazy that like all 3 of those guys are just like side dishes to Christian McCaffrey, an absolute monster that as soon as he got over with the 49ers, with or without Brock Purdy, became an absolute beast, averaging over 23 fantasy points per game. That was by far the most in the league. All but one of his games was an RB1 after he arrived. Huge spikes in receiving usage, huge spikes in touchdowns, spikes in yards per carry. He's a great runner in any type of scheme, but especially the Shanahan scheme that makes it just easy for the running backs. He was a beast. He was an absolute monster, Christian McCaffrey. And then he was even better when Brock Purdy took over. In fact, he scored at least 1 touchdown, whether receiving or rushing, in every single game, including playoffs, that Brock Purdy played. He had 9 total touchdowns in those 8 games as well. So on pace for over 18 touchdowns on the year while playing with Brock Purdy, an absolute monster. And after he arrived there with San Fran, the receiving role, we always knew he could catch the ball, but it took yet another level, 107 targets on pace for it, and on pace for as well as 85 catches, nearly 800 yards and 7 just receiving touchdowns. Never mind the rushing work where he was on pace for 1,200 rushing yards, 10 rushing touchdowns as well. Back to that, again, 2018 type of cheat code McCaffrey. And to me, the only thing in his way from achieving that yet again would be health. We know that there's been some injury concerns in the past with him, but he stayed relatively healthy all last year. And in an offense that he doesn't have to take huge hits or take 350 carries to be productive, I have him going for the lion's share of the work here. Let me kind of scroll back up. I realized I just didn't even have McCaffrey pulled up here. I have him still getting, 53% of the carries. So that equates to 286 in this healthy ground pie, 98 targets. That will definitely be towards the top for running backs in terms of opportunities. But in an efficient offense like this, he can do, in an efficient player like him, that much more work. So, nearly, I have him going for almost 2K total yards, nearly 18 touchdowns, and none of it really feels that unreasonable to me, as well as 83 catches through the air. So that's why I think McCaffrey has to be your number one pick overall. It may be in best ball when the receivers go so heavily. Yes, I do think Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase are strong cases at tops of drafts too, but after statting this out and just seeing how much healthy pie there is for him to eat in both facets of the game, I might start taking him one overall. He's just that damn good, and this offense is that damn good. Behind him, a little bit just scraps, but they do typically have a running back see 25 to 30% their RB2, and Eli Mitchell's a good back, so I have him mixing in for some work, some touchdowns, being okay. He's more of a handcuff, though. And then the receiving wise, I have nobody else of note, just Danny Gray, Juwan Jennings, whatever they end up picking up. So they pick up. But really those big four, and I love them all at their price tags, that being CMC, potentially first overall, Debo, a great late third, early fourth, Ayuk, amazing target in the 5th and 6th, and Kittle right there in the 4th and 5th, a great tight end edge, given, again, that all of these ships rise with Brock Purdy. If Trey Lance does take over, things will look different, and I'll have to really readjust these projections, but it does seem like it's definitely the Brock Purdy show, and I'm just so excited to see what year 2 brings.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to kind of repeat a couple of things that you said. We have similar takes. This obviously, it's not a hot take. It all hinges on Brock Purdy, right? I mean, we saw him in a small but not super small sample size last year, and we saw him be successful for like half the season, something like that. I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at.
About 8 games, including playoffs. He played, I think, 7 full games, and then you had the elbow injury in that.
Yeah, so it's a decent sample size, and he was excellent. And yeah, I mean, there's some question marks. Is he going to be that excellent anymore? If he is, then yeah, these guys could all have substantial, big years. Obviously, health comes into play with all these guys. The only one of these guys that I don't like at their price tag is Debo, and I love Debo. He's my when he was awesome, and maybe he's still awesome, he's just about the most fun guy to watch that there is. But I'm not, I agree with you. I think his numbers will be comparable to Ayuk's, and if you can get Ayuk 2 rounds cheaper, I'm not really looking to have them both. So much more likely to take Ayuk than Debo. I agree. Kittle's value greatly increases with Purdy, and I would probably also have him 4 overall as tight ends, and maybe, I don't know, there's a small part of me that would maybe even like him as much as Hawkinson, but that might be crazy.
Yeah, the touchdown upside is higher with Kittle. If he does see the 109 targets he was on pace for with Purdy, if that maintains, he definitely could outscore every tight end not named Kelsey. That we've seen it before. We're talking about one of the best tight ends to ever play the game. So yeah, I'm with you there. He could definitely threaten Hawkinson. They're neck and neck. They're back in a tier together for me, whereas before I had them a little bit separated. So yeah, I'm all in. I love this 49ers team. I love them at their price tags. And all these big stats I'm projecting, again, it's not 4,200 yards and 32 touchdowns for Purdy. That's not insane, especially when you're throwing to these weapons. That's why it doesn't they seem like big numbers, and a lot of these guys are going to be toward the tops of their positions, but we're not asking Purdy to be otherworldly. It's not like a Daniel Jones projection I had the other series. 32 touchdowns could end up being a lot, but remember, he threw 2 in every single game last year. He was on pace for 34. So yeah, I mean, he just has to be serviceable, and he'll have good numbers because the scheme's so good, and everyone else around him will continue to rise as they did last year too.
I really do think Trey Lance is garbage, though. I got to say. I've
been on that. I don't think he deserves it out here. I was so happy to trade him in our dynasty league. Obviously, the raw ceiling remains as high as anybody, but yeah, I'm with you. I don't think he's going to turn into be anything And imagine they had just not given up all those picks for him and they just went with, they obviously didn't know what they had in Brock Purdy when they got him, but they still had all the draft capital plus just the starter they had. This team could be that much scarier. They sunk like 3 first rounders into Trey Lance. I mean, my God.
I thought that was crazy at the time. I'm probably wrong about as many of these things as I'm right, but I was right about that one. All right, moving along, Seattle. And this is one of the teams, I mean, sometimes the years blend together for me, so it's hard for me to remember season from season. But I can tell you, I mean, we definitely thought these guys were just going to be awful last year, right? I mean, going in and it's just like, oh, they lost Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson was, the anchor of this team. They're so bad. Oh, wow, they're going to start Geno Smith. This is going to be an embarrassment. Who would have thought Russell Wilson was going to go and become one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL? And Geno Smith was going to be pretty damn good. And all of a sudden the Seahawks, this is another one I was wrong on, but I was in good company. I think just about everybody was. But all of a sudden the Seahawks are kind of an interesting team to talk about. So go ahead, Wolf, talk about them.
They're very interesting. I know, truth, that there might not have been a bigger shocker in the NFL than the Seahawks versus the Broncos last year. Now that all their fortunes were pretty much exactly reversed. They made the playoffs with Geno Smith, one of the best comeback stories I think you could ask for. I really loved just seeing that. It's fun to root for something like that. And they've gone all in on him at least for the next year or two by loading up. I think this offense will only continue to ascend, assuming it's not a one-year wonder for Geno, which is obviously a big leap to take. But he looked really solid last year. Good play designs for him. So we'll talk about him in a second. But just overall team-wise, for Pete Carroll, they typically have been about 53 to 47%, pass to run. One of the more run-heavy teams in the league under Pete Carroll. The last few years, they've been steadily below league average in terms of plays run. But I expect they go and draft JSN, my favorite wide receiver in this class, one of the most dominant, deadliest slot receivers to come into the league. And you mix him with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Right away, I think that's the best trio in the entire league right now. And so you make a move like that, I do think we can expect a little bit of a philosophy change under Pete Carroll, where, as you can see, I have them bumping up the passes more than they ever did in the last 4 years to a 56% pass, a 44% rush, and they pick the pace up a little bit. They end up being right around league average. I have a -6. Given the years past, they've been -100 and then -40 in terms of plays run. I do think they pick the pace up just a little bit with a little bit more passing game volume is how I see the team level kind of shaking out. And then we look at Geno Smith, last year's, again, comeback story of the year. And I have him taking yet another step forward. It's kind of hard not to when you mix in another weapon like this, a second year as a starter to get even more comfortable. The only risk would be teams figure him out or it was a one-year wonder. But assuming it's not, I don't think it was, just based on how he looked. I think he takes yet another step forward after going 4,230 touchdowns. I think he bumps that up to about 4,500, 34 plus touchdowns. He was the number one deep passer in the league last year, completed nearly 50% of his passes over 25 yards. He had 14 touchdowns on such throws. And now you mix in a speedy slot guy like JSN, the mismatches are going to be endless that you can create. Now, they did run 3 receiver sets among the lowest in the league last year, but they didn't have a weapon like JSN. I imagine that is going to be a big philosophy switch, and that will again lead to more pass attempts for this team. So I think Geno continues to build on that impressive quarterback 5 finish last year. He was top 12 in over half his game. He only had 1 dud on the season. Every other game was above 15 points. So he was dominant. He had some huge spike weeks as well. And when you have this trio, another year with added linemen that was already a big boost last year, I really think Geno is going to continue to be a beast this year and bring a nice aerial pie to this team. And then you have some really impressive mouths, as we talked about, my favorite trio of receivers in the league. How do I see it getting distributed between them? So in terms of target share, kind of like the 49ers, you have great mouths, and I think it's going to just be very concentrated on those 3 big mouths here, that being DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and JSN, that dangerous trio of wide receivers. I have all of them going for at least 118 targets. And that doesn't happen very often where you have 3 receivers. Often you can see 2 get to 120 or so, but you very rarely see 3 approach that. But I think just given the talent level of all 3 of these guys and the rapport we've already seen between Lockett, Metcalf, and Geno Smith, you mix in another weapon like JSN, and I do think that's a very fair distribution here. Metcalf himself has seen 140 or more targets, I believe, in 3 straight seasons. Let me just pull it up, grab my notes here real quick. 140, 128, and 141. So right in line with what we've seen. Maybe a little bit gets shaved off because of JSN, but I think that gets off shook because he's been at 27, 25% market share as well. Seeing that, I think he goes down a little bit in market share, but the team bumping up the overall size of the pie keeps him right around 140 targets. Now, last year, he only had 6 touchdowns. Both years prior to that, he had 12, 12, and then his rookie year, he had 8. So I think that was more of the anomaly, being only at 6 when he has the size and speed of DK Metcalf. And now you have another weapon like JSN to account for. I do expect that we'll see DK Metcalf get back to what we typically see touchdown-wise. And as you can see how I stat out those, so 142 targets, 89 catches, 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns seems very, very reasonable for DK Metcalf. Maybe the touchdowns don't quite hit there if JSN is as dominant as he can be, but he's not much of a red zone scare, in my opinion. I think this only opens things up for DK Metcalf. And then we got Lockett doing what Lockett does. Another 120-ish targets, another 80. He's been insanely consistent his last 5 years. It doesn't matter who was throwing to him. Tyler Lockett, these last years, has had at least 23% target share, 8 touchdowns, 1,000 yards in 5 seasons. And I don't think any reason, yes, again, JSN could potentially even take him over as the number 2. And I still think we could see Tyler Lockett put up 1,008, an 80 catch season, just like we've come to expect from him. But again, JSN, the new arrival, I think he's going to walk right in. And when you got these 2 guys on the outside and you're as deadly as he is in space and after the catch, he could easily outscored Lockett. He has the upside to outscore Metcalf. I think he's a year or 2 away from being the true number 1 here, but there is like Cooper Kupp layup targets just over the middle and making everybody else miss. That's the type of upside this kid. Remember, he was at Ohio State with Olave, with Garrett Wilson. If you ask anybody who are 2 of the most promising young receivers in the league, they'd be probably the first 2 you bring up. He outperformed them by a mile when they was on the field altogether. He was the best receiver there. So that's all you really need to know, that yes, Metcalf and Lockett are insane elite target hogs themselves, but JSN has already played alongside 2 elite great target hogs, and he was the best one there. So it's not without the realm of possibility that he outscores at least Lockett this season as well. He does go around earlier than Lockett, and so I go with the guy myself right now that I've seen do it before. I go Lockett ahead of him. I certainly go DK, who's going round 3 or so around the Deebo Samuel range. I go those guys above JSN, and I haven't actually got a lot of, as much as I've just raved about him, I haven't got a ton of him, given that he goes more expensive than Lockett, a full round higher than him, and some of the talent there around him, Joe Mixon, and there's just really good players that I can't sink myself into JSN quite yet. He has had injury concerns. He is a bit smaller, so I'd rather see it for a year than buy him at his current redraft price, but I still love the player. Behind these 3, though, there really isn't much. I have Noah Fant seeing 65 targets, Will Dissly seeing about 30, and those guys scoring a couple touchdowns, but nothing you'll ever count on in fantasy. The running back picture, I do have Zach Charbonnet, very good pass protector, something they've already cited as a big reason they drafted him. I think he takes over as the immediate 3rd down back and gets himself, 40 to 50 targets, very efficient as a receiver in college. So I can see him hauling in a couple receiving touchdowns, 241 yards. I do think, and we'll get to the ground game now, Kenneth Walker remains the lead back, but I also think he might be among the most overdrafted players in fantasy going, mid round 4, sometimes even early round 4 right now. I just don't think they drafted Zach Charbonnet, a really good player, in round 2 to keep it a Kenneth Walker type of show. He only had 220 carries last year anyway, so I'm projecting him right in line with what we've already saw. I think he'll be right as efficient as he was. I really like the player. I mean, he had some really great highlights last year. I had him on a bunch of my teams. A lot of people dropped him, and then as soon as he took over, he was an absolute beast. So I am a big fan of Walker. It was a bit boom or bust. He wasn't great in the passing game, and he got Geno hurt. Not hurt, but he got him hit pretty hard as a pretty bad pass protector last year. So I do think losing that receiving work and this being a split, and Carroll already come out saying it could be a hot hand thing where if Charbonnet's getting hot any given game, we could just flip it and go to him. And Walker did as many big plays as he had. He was towards the top in the league and runs for 0 to negative yards because he often got hit at the line and tried to do a little bit too much. So we'll see if he does that again. So he ends up being one of the more overvalued players, in my opinions. And that's still, almost 1,000 yards and 9 TDs on the ground. It's just that's not necessarily worth a early round 4 pick, in my opinion. And I think that just about covers it. Charbonnet, 640 and 5 on the ground in addition to the receiving work. He does have that kind of ultimate handcuff with benefit upside. So I do like him. I typically go Antonio Gibson in the same price range, who I projected a little bit higher. He doesn't need as much to happen for him to reach his true ceiling. But if Walker did get hurt, Charbonnet could just absolutely explode as the featured back within an offense that I think will be in the top half, certainly the top half, probably the top 8 in total points. I really, really just like pretty much everybody as the receiver here. And then the running game, I'd like going more to Charbonnet at the cheaper price tag with the handcuff with benefit type of upside.
All right. So a couple things. First of all, and I feel like I'm being negative on some of these things because I think you're so enthusiastic about some of these guys and shoot for the moon on a lot of these. I love Geno Smith. I'm a big fan of his story, and by all accounts, like he's very well respected. Even when he hadn't had this miracle season, he's very well liked around the league. You can't really find anybody say a bad thing about him, and so I'm kind of always drawn to guys like that and root for them, and I continue to root for him. With that said, I have a hard time believing he's going to go for 4,500 yards and like 35 touchdowns. Like that I hope it happens. It's hard for me to believe he's going to surpass what you referred to in the notes as a miracle season. It's like, miracle season. And yeah, we're going to up that by 10, 15%. I don't know. I'm a little skeptical about that. I do love DK.
That's how much respect I have for JSN.
So
Geno already did 4,230. Like, I don't think it's a huge bump at all when you add the talent level of a JSN and how dangerous that's going to make this team to defend.
Eventually, I think that you're right. So we don't have this, or at least I don't have this data in front of me right now. But how many rookies can you remember in, say, the last 30 years going off right out of the cannon the way that you're kind of anticipating this guy going? We're talking 80, 90 catches, well over 1,000 yards, and you got him pegged in for 7 touchdowns. How many rookies have done that? Randy Moss, yeah, I can remember that. Maybe a little before your time when he came in with the Vikings, but he was balls out from the second he came into the league. What other rookies have done that? I'm sure there's some I'm not remembering.
Odell, Mike Evans. Lately, Drake London last year had almost 1,000, and he wasn't even that good last year. It happens. It used to be a huge anomaly. It used to be the 3-year breakup and the 2-year,
yes,
but we've definitely seen some rookies come in and do some damage.
Agree, the game has changed, and we have seen rookies come in to do some damage. I'd be interested in seeing some of those guys' stat lines as rookies, aside from Moss, and how they would stack up to this. It's not impossible. I don't know. It's one of those things where they're going to have to prove it to me. And I hope they do, because I'm a fan of the Seahawks. I'm a fan of Geno. But, to continue to feed those 2 huge mouths that are already on the team and then bring this guy in and be like, well, shit, he might be the best one of all of them. And it's all kind of dangling on the edge of Geno Smith being even better than he was in a year where, like, we've already declared it was a miracle. I don't know. That seems like a lot to me. But like I said, I'm pulling for him. Now, this is gonna put the Wolf to the test, because even without me being a part and jumping in, we've gone 33 minutes on 2 teams, and the Wolf has got a hard 19 minutes to finish the next 2. So we're gonna see if he can do it, or if he's just gonna have to skip his dentist appointment.
Yeah, exactly. Might have to just miss the dentist. So no, we'll dive in to the Cardinals. I think I can definitely get these done. If it's 150, I can still. The dentist is very close to where I live, so I can always shrink down if need be. So we'll dive in though quickly here to the Cardinals. And if you're enjoying the show, please do consider that thumbs up button. It does so greatly appreciate us if you're here live with us or catching the replay and you like the content so far, you enjoy what we're doing, and all these projections, as I always say, will be on the Roto Street Journal website. Let's dive into the Arizona Cardinals here, though. And what do I expect with them? There's a ton of question marks here. So maybe I do a little bit of a quicker breakdown here because we need to know more about Kyler Murray's health. We don't really know anything about Drew Metzing, the wide receiver coach for Cleveland, is now the offensive coordinator here. Rich Gannon, the head coach, coming over from the Eagles. So that's where I take, I read a ton of reports about what he's saying this offense will be and what he's expecting for Kyler Murray. But this is one that could definitely vastly change as we learn more and more about it. But with Murray there, the Cardinals have typically been around 55% pass, 45% run, and about 40 to 50 plays above league average. Rich Gannon coming over from the Eagles, they're closer to 50-50, but also similarly above league average in terms of plays run. And Gannon has said, we're going to maximize what Murray does best, uses mobility, uses big play arm, and really capitalize on those things. He's meeting with him to chat. He's very impressed with so far how Kyler Murray, all those reports about how he doesn't put the time in and he needs to have a study clause in there. He says he's seen none of that so far since he arrived. I know he's not going to come out in the media and be like, my star quarterback's a piece of shit and not studying his playbook. But it does sound like so far the vibes between these guys, Gannon and Kyler Murray, are phenomenal. Murray saying he's a big fan of everything so far. All the reports are he's really been hammering the rehab as hard as possible. And that's something I had a question with. I questioned Kyler Murray and his work ethic plenty, but everybody so far, his teammates, his coaches, the beat writers, saying he is the first one in, the last one out. And even though he can't necessarily play quite yet, he is hitting the rehab as hard as he can and hitting the playbook as hard as he can. So it seems like to me, he's very, very motivated in what is a big, big year for him, given they'll have a big decision to make whether or not to extend him. It seems like he's really ready to thrive. And he has all the makings of a fantasy stud whenever he is on the field. Quarterback 6, 5, and 8 in points per game the last 3 seasons. You take out last year, that one game against the Patriots where he got hurt, the first play of the game, tore his ACL. He had 80% of his games as a top 12 guy last year. So he's very, very solid again. And through his last 3 seasons, 68% of his games have been top 12 with numerous 40 and 35 and 39, just huge spike weeks in addition to some pretty decent consistency. And yes, of course, losing DeAndre Hopkins, that doesn't help by any stretch of the imagination. You wouldn't think, at least, but it doesn't kill him. He goes from 25 points per game to 22 points per game. And then you added Marquise Brown last year. He was actually better in games without Hopkins and with Marquise Brown than he was with both of those guys on the field. I don't know why. Doesn't make much sense to me, but he actually gained points with Marquise Brown in and DeAndre Hopkins out. So to me, it's not a death knell that DeAndre Hopkins is gone here. And the fact that he is rehabbing is hard. One of the risks I had with Kyler Murray is, well, now that Hopkins is gone, they're just going to shut him down for the year and move on to the next one. But it sounds to me like they are really aiming for close to week 1. It probably will be at least a week or 2. But as long as he avoids the PUP, and even if he goes on the PUP and misses 6 games, and then you get him for your last half of the year, this is a dynamic playmaker that has always been a solid fantasy option whenever out in the field. And now he's going to have his best line of his career too with Paris. What's his name? Paris Johnson, I think, is from Ohio State. They took him at 6 overall, their best tackle in the class. And so as long as he's out there, I think Kyler Murray's in a spot even without Hopkins to do some good damage. So I project him for right around what he's done throughout his career, 3,800 yards, 28 touchdowns, nothing too crazy there, given that's what his kind of averages are. That would require him to be out there for most, if not all, of the season. So as we learn more, I'll adjust should he be missing some time. And of course, as I should have highlighted with him at the top, the other big thing with him is that Konami upside. Now, coming off the torn ACL, I wonder if they'll continue to allow him to run it. But 100 carries, 586 yards, 6 touchdowns, again, right in line with what we've consistently seen from Kyler Murray. But maybe, just maybe, they take a little bit of that rushing work off his plate. But Rich Gannon comes from the Eagle system where they love to use their quarterbacks in the run game. They love to create these mismatches, and they maximize their quarterback's dynamic ability. And that's, again, what Rich Gannon continues to cite is we can't rein him in because that's what makes him so damn dangerous. So that's how I expect his pie to be. So not huge in terms of overall passing volume, but not nothing either. And I think that by far, as you can see my target shares, here on this side. I think Marquise Brown ends up stepping up for a massive target share. And that's just based on what we saw last year without Hopkins in the lineup. He averaged 10.7 targets per game. That was the 5th in terms of wide receiver volume. He also averaged 18.3 points per game in those games without Hopkins. He was the wide receiver 7 in that span, seeing 11, 17, 11, 10, and 9 targets after a mediocre week 1. He still put up 14 points in week 1, but after that, he truly started to light it up as he got his legs under him in this offense. He was on pace for 181 targets, 122 catches, 1,400 yards, and 8 touchdowns. I mean, that's a bona fide wide receiver 1 season. And I do think as long as he can stay healthy, that's been a big issue with Marquise Brown. But as you can see here, 91 catches, nearly 1,100 yards, and 7 touchdowns. I don't think that's too crazy of a projection for this kid. They were best friends in college. They played together in college. They had that pre-established rapport, and we already saw it thriving last year before Hopkins came in and then before Marquise Brown got hurt. So I definitely could see him picking right back up where these two left off to begin last year and making Marquise Brown one of my favorite mid to late 5th round picks. You can get him often as a wide receiver 3. And like I said, I think he has top 12 upside. If he played it out last year without Hopkins, he would have been the wide receiver 7. So I really, really like Marquise Brown. Behind him, I don't think there's a ton to dive into. Rondale Moore can never stay healthy. I see him getting right around the 2nd highest share on the team, and that's only at 14%. So that kind of tells you everything you need to know. He never really played that much better with or without Hopkins. He's always been below 10 yards per reception on his career, despite being a very dynamic guy in college. It just hasn't materialized. They very much use him as a dink or dunk guy. Maybe that role does evolve and change under the new regime. But in all honesty, I think he gets outplayed by Greg Dortch, who every time he gets used, he's not the athlete of Rondale Moore. He's nothing sexy, but he's only had a handful of games where he was actually on the field for over 50% of snaps. Last year, that happened only 5 times. One of the games was meh, but 4 of the 5 games when he was on the field for over 60% of the snaps, 13.3, 15.5, 17.0, and 19.3 points per game. And that's half PPR. So full PPR, even higher. He had multiple 20-point days last year in full PPR. Again, only playing really over half the snaps in 5 games. That's pretty damn impressive. I just think the kid's a baller and gets it done. And now he's got a very clear path between Rondale Moore's injury history, between Marquise Brown's injury history. Now no DeAndre Hopkins. Nobody's touching Greg Dortch. I think he's a phenomenal last-round stab. He caught 80% of his balls last year. He's just a reliable baller. That's where he needs to be, gets it done, and he's been good in the red zone too. So I like him. Michael Wilson's the only receiver on this team above 6 feet, the rookie, and apparently he was a highlight play all of OTAs so far in practices. So he could step right into a big role. To me, it's behind Marquise Brown. It is a bunch of question marks. I don't love Rondale Moore because he goes right around round 12, 13, and I don't think he's going to outperform any of the guys that are going undrafted behind him. Maybe I'm wrong. We've seen glimpses of him being solid. The tight end situation is definitely more wait and see for me, given that Zach Ertz, bad knee injury late last year as an old age. Who knows if he does fully recover? If he does, it's just going to be constant nibbling of the cheese between him and McBride, who had some nice glimpses once Ertz got hurt. Was the first tight end drafted last year for a reason. A good athlete, great after the catch in college. Could see his role definitely elevate. And if Ertz is going to be out for half the year or more, I'd actually really like Trey McBride. But until we have more clarity on the injury situation there, it's tough to do much more. And then when we get the running game, this is very, very quick because Keontae Ingram and Corey Clement are the backups to James Conner. That strikes no fear in anybody. Those guys, as long as Conner is healthy, should see almost 0 field time. And that's the case with Conner these last few years. He's been around a 75% snap player. He does lose some of the rushing work to Kyler Murray. That's why he's actually been significantly better when Kyler Murray's out. So his floor is pretty damn good to me because I think he's going to be good either way, with or without Kyler Murray. But if Murray's out, he's actually even better. So ultimately, I have him going for 230 carries, which is right around what he has seen since joining the Cardinals. He's seen 239, 202, and then 183, but he missed 3 games last year. So he would have been on pace for right around 260 had he played the full season. He typically sees about 55% of the rushing market share, with Kyler Murray seeing the other 30%. So I do think 75 to 80% snap player. He nearly plays all the downs. He's seen at least a 11, 8, and 8% target share, at least 40 targets in 3 straight years now. So I think he's going to be a beast. He's the running back 9 in points per game, and back-to-back years was the running back 5 in points per game, actually just 2 seasons ago. 71% 100% opportunity shares in back-to-back year, 280 routes. Like the guy he's a bell cow. He's a bell cow in every sense of the word. And as I was getting at, even without Kyler Murray, he actually averages 21.3 points per game compared to 15 points per game with Kyler Murray. So if Murray does have to miss some time, it becomes the James Conner show even more so. So I'm definitely a big fan here of James Conner going in round 8 or 9. I think we're getting right around a top 15 running back performance that you can get so cheap, too cheap in my opinion. So I'm a huge fan of James Conner this year.
Yeah. So, I know I've been throwing cold water on a few of your predictions here and there. I'm not going to do that here. I actually just really quickly will say, without too much elaboration, I agree with you on your Connor take. And I also really like your Marquise Brown take. I would definitely be buyers for both of those guys at the price that they're at. So good call on those. All right.
Yeah, I've been buying a lot of Cardinals truth and best ball. I get a lot of Marquise Brown at his price. I get a lot of James Conner at his price. And at that point, I'm like, well, I might as well draft Kyler Murray when he's going so cheap too and stack up this offense and see what happens. So I have a lot more Cardinals than I probably wanted to, but I do love them at their price tags. I really do. But those are definitely the two highlight players that you mentioned there at the end.
A lot of guys to load up on for a team that went 4-13 last year, but here we are.
Sometimes that's the best when the team sucks and they have to chuck. That often ends up with good fantasy success. So I can care less about the record.
Sometimes I can think of plenty of examples where it's gone the other way as well.
That's very true indeed.
Let's get into the Rams, and I would say the Rams hold the distinction of being the team that you and I were both just look like absolute idiots for how good we thought they would be at the beginning of last year. It was just kind of like I was in the headspace, and I think you were too. They won the Super Bowl. They're back. Tough to bet against them. And it's like, actually, they're terrible. Like, they're not just bad. They're not just as good. They're not just not as good as they need to be to win to repeat as Super Bowl champions. They were a legitimately horrendous team. Now, there were a couple things that went into that, injuries and stuff. I maintain that had they stayed completely healthy, they still wouldn't have been very good. And of course, hindsight is 2020, looking back on that stuff. But man, what a train wreck they were last year.
Yeah, it was a painful team to watch. I don't necessarily buy in the fact that they wouldn't have been significantly better had Stafford been actually healthy for the majority of last season. They did look kind of like a train wreck even when he was in there early, but he was playing.
They lost.
He should never have been out there in the first place. Like, he didn't look healthy from the start of last year. And obviously these projections are going to be based on Stafford actually being healthy. Who knows if that will be the case? So far in all the practices, he's done everything he's supposed to. He's experiencing no pain in the elbow. But yeah, I mean, it was a mess. It was an absolute mess, even with him last year. So I do think as long as he's healthy, though, I don't see much of a reason why they can't return back or at least close to that type of team, at least as an offense. Whether the defense holds up their end of the bargain, we'll find out. But I do think this team can get right back into one of the more competitive offenses in the league should Stafford be healthy. Because you really just need Stafford. You really just need Cooper Kupp and then a serviceable running back, which I do think Cam Akers in. And this offense can really just get right back to where they were 2 years ago. And that's what I'm projecting right now. We've seen it's a 50-50 shot to me at this point, whether Stafford's actually healthy or not. But I'm going to project it as it is until I hear otherwise. If he's starting to experience some pain in the elbow and different things in camp, we'll have to reevaluate. But assuming he's healthy, and last time he was healthy, we got right around the 60-40 pass run ratio for Sean McVay. He's typically hovered right around that ratio in his career. When he had Todd Gurley, it was a little closer to 55-45. But I think with Stafford, we get a very similar offense to what we saw last time, which was 423 rushes to 630 pass attempts. I think we get something very similar to that this time. Last time we had Stafford out there. The other thing that could impact this team level distribution as well, Mike LaFleur coming in as their offensive coordinator, I think they got him as a steal. He came over from the Jets, and I know the Jets may have seemed like a train wreck these last couple of years, but that was with Zach Wilson at the helm. Whenever Zach Wilson was out, the Jets actually led the NFL the past 2 seasons with Mike LaFleur as their play caller. The Jets led the NFL in team passing yards, 292 per game, with anybody other than Zach Wilson. That includes Joe Flacco. That includes big game Mike White. They actually had more pass yards than Chiefs and Pat Mahomes per game over the last 2 seasons. They averaged nearly 47 pass attempts per game. That'd be on pace for 790 on the full season. LaFleur liked to air it out. And I know McVay already kind of likes to air it out. So should Stafford be healthy, with now LaFleur there. I know it's going to be McVay's offense. He's the one that ultimately calls the shot, but they craft the game plan together, and just a little bit even more pass happy than they have been in the past could really signal a big rebound for Matt Stafford. And as you can see, where I'm projecting him right now means I think he's going to be healthy, and I do think he rebounds in a big way. 4,800, 20 yards, 33 touchdowns, right in line with what he did in his only healthy season with him. He had 4,886 yards and 41 touchdowns. So I have him going backwards even. And like I said, with LaFleur being here, maybe he could even take a step up. So I don't think that's that crazy of a projection, assuming health, a big assumption. I understand that. But he's been an Iron Man throughout most of his career. So as long as he got everything tended to and it's all good, I don't see any reason why we can't get back to that massive, massive aerial pie. And then we talk about the distribution of that massive, massive aerial pie. There's really only one seat at this table that matters, and it matters big. That's Cooper Kupp. He's seen 32 and 31% target share in back-to-back years when he's been out there. Obviously, last year, the devastating injury mid-season, but he's still Cooper Kupp, was number one in points per game, was on pace to yet again just break fantasy like he did 2 seasons ago, where he was, he led the NFL in every category: yards, receptions, targets, everything. He was just an absolute monster, and I don't see much of a reason for him to be anything different than what we've seen. A crazy stat to me, across his last 2 seasons in his games played, he has been a top 12 wide receiver 81% of the time. Receiver is extremely difficult to be that consistent with. Even like Justin Jefferson is around a 65% wide receiver 1 throughout his career right now. He's actually even lower than that if you look at his whole career, but across the last 2 seasons, he's right around 60% wide receiver 1. That just goes to show you how damn crazy Cooper Kupp has been. Back-to-back seasons, the first in points per game in PPR or half PPR. Now Allen Robinson's gone, and I know he did jack shit, but he still took some targets. He still was the second highest target share on this team last year. So replaced with Van Jefferson, he's done not a whole ton in his NFL career. I have him, so behind Cooper Kupp. You don't need me to tell you how damn good the guy is, but on 189 targets, which is already huge, I have him going for 140 catches, right like what we saw 2 seasons ago, 18, 20 yards, 13 touchdowns. He hit 16 touchdowns just a couple of years ago. So none of that, as crazy as those numbers look, the way he was playing last year, he would have put these up even with a hampered Matt Stafford all year. That's just how good they scheme him up. Those layup targets, getting him deep still, great red zone weapon, the way they'd use him in pick plays. He's just a monster. He's an absolute monster. He's well worth a top 3 overall pick. I usually go Jamar Chase as the wide receiver too, but honestly, if you told me Cooper Kupp was playing all the games next year, then I would definitely want Cooper Kupp over maybe even Justin Jefferson at that point, it was so crazy. And through his career, he's played 48 of 49 games through 3 seasons ahead of last year. So he hadn't been a huge injury concern until he got hurt last year, but he is getting up there in age. So a little bit riskier. Either way, you love Cooper Kupp, top 5 pick, lock him in. I did bump him ahead of Tyreek Hill in my latest round of projections. And as you saw in the AFC East, I absolutely love Tyreek Hill. Behind him, what's the scraps, what's left at the table for people? I have Tyler Higbee actually second on this team in target share. He's got a good rapport with Matt Stafford. He's consistently been around a 15 to 16% target guy anyways. He hasn't done a huge amount of work with it, but when Robert Woods used to miss time, Higbee would sometimes step up and have these monster days. So I think there's a decent ceiling there with Tyler Higbee, in addition to a good quality floor. Not a ton of tight ends are in line for 100+ targets, and I do think he is the second mouth to feed here. So I like him. Going to right now the tight end 16. I think he's a good buy at his price tag. A nice safe floor that you can then pair with like a Taysom Hill. If you punt the position, that's a solid way to go. To get some good upside and floor baked in with each other. I have him going for 732 and 7 touchdowns. There was one year where he even outscored Travis Kelce for the last 5 games of the season. I don't obviously expect that to happen, but we've seen him even shoulder the entire passing game when injuries were going on all around him. So there is upside to Travis Kelce Tyler Higbee, in addition to a pretty good floor, in my opinion. Van Jefferson comes in next, 16% share, 101 targets. Last time out there with Matt Stafford as a rookie, Van Jefferson had 800 yards and 6 touchdowns. So a little bump in volume, maybe a little bit. He averaged 16 yards a catch last time out there with Stafford. I think that comes down just a little bit, but maybe a few higher percentage plays. They say he's fitting into that Roberts Woods style role quite well. Stafford saying, I have full trust in him. Coach praising how he's come in, Van Jefferson, and really thrived on picking up different pieces of the playbook. So I think he could definitely have himself a nice, solid year. I love him at his round 13, 14 price, similar to KJ Osborne, like a number 2 that I actually like him more than Osborne. I had Osborne going for about 750 and 6. So I like Van Jefferson quite a bit more than I really even intended to. Just the way this passing game shook out, I think it makes sense. I don't necessarily see. I think him and Stafford, as long as Stafford's healthy, this is a good rapport. Ben Skoranek doesn't matter, but I do want to highlight Puka Nacua. So rookie comes in. Everybody so far in camp, I talked about Ayuk being the standout for the 49ers. Puka Nacua was the standout surprise for the Rams so far. McVay, Cooper Kupp, Stafford, all of them are gushing how this rookie is so damn smart. He's everywhere he needs to be. They're able to move him into the backfield, move him out to the slot. To me, it seems like he would honestly be the heir apparent to Cooper Kupp if he, let's see him play before we do that. But if something happened to Cooper Kupp, he seems to have the most versatility. Now, I'm not saying he put up Cooper Kupp numbers, but he seems like he might be being groomed for that layup type of target role. So he's another guy I really like as a last round stab. I have him going for 44 catches, 568 yards, and 4 touchdowns with the 4th highest target share on this team, with room to obviously go even higher should an injury strike among this receiving core anywhere along there. And that wraps up the passing game. So looking at the run game, and I didn't even highlight the running backs just because the Rams have been dead last since Todd Gurley left. They've been dead last consistently in terms of targets to the running back position. And so I don't expect a huge whopping target share. I think it will be split, as you guys can see here, 5% going to Akers, 5% going to Kyron Williams, a quality receiving back in his own right. So I don't think much of the running game value, the running back value, will come through the air. Akers is a fine pass catcher. So maybe if they did decide to bump that to 50, 60, this could be a huge boost to his value. But I think he's going to have a pretty quality year, even without it, just because I see him inheriting, right around 66, 64% is what I have him projected for now of the rushing pie. That equates to 271 carries, 1,165 yards, and even just at 4.3 yards a pop. I mean, that's not bad. And 11 touchdowns. He's a good touchdown scorer. To close out last year, Cam Akers was the running back 4 in fantasy. He had himself a really, really nice stretch, averaging nearly 18 points per game across his last 5 games. Really seemed like it took a while. He tore his Achilles 2 seasons ago, and almost nobody ever comes back from that. It seems like it took him about a year and a half to get back into that game shape. And after that, he was the running back for 3 straight 100-plus yard efforts to end the season, and ultimately played on over 72% or more of the snaps in 5 of those last 6 games, seeing over 70% or more of the opportunities and work in that backfield game. So I expect that again from Cam Akers, a 65 or 70% snap and usage player in this backfield. I think he has himself a really nice rebound as he heads into a contract year. McVay himself has said this is the centerpiece of our offense. We're really building around Cam Akers and what he did to finish last year. I buy it. I really do. And the offseason moves. The only guy they brought in since then, they drafted Zach Evans in round 6. They've re-signed Sony Michel, who could potentially vulture a touchdown here or there. He does offer a nice insurance policy to Cam Akers. But as long as Akers is healthy, I mean, this is the Akers show. They ride him out in his last year of his contract and see what they got in him. That's how I see this backfield going.
All right. Well, I'll keep this very brief because I know we both got to run. But I'll just say, not interested in any Rams receivers except Cooper Kupp. Do like Tyler Higbee quite a bit. Not really interested in Cam Akers at the price he's going. Don't fully trust him. And I got to say, I hate saying this, I'm skeptical of Stafford. He had a little bit of a stink about him, like it's about over last year. And I hope that's not true. I'm a fan, and I'm a fan of the Cooper Kupp Stafford connection. It was just unbelievable. I had that stack 2 years ago, which was just a hell of a lot of fun, which I got for like 18 auction dollars combined or something like that. And so there was nothing more fun than pulling for that. I don't know. I'm pulling for Stafford. I'm not going to put too many eggs in that basket.
Hey, we'll see. I'm buying it. I think he's a tough motherfucker. We'll see. We'll definitely get signs out of camp. We'll get a read on the situation. If he's lingering with elbow pain and things, we'll know. And then I'll be all out on everybody other than Cooper Kupp if that's going to be the case. We will see. But I do think Van Jefferson, don't overlook him at his around 13, 14 price tag. Even if you're not in, I think he'll be a good one. Tunes, same Puka as well. I know he's been a huge Puka guy since he arrived. So, Tunes, great to see you. Always here. Everybody else out there, please do consider that thumbs up button on your way out, whether you're here live, catching the replay. So greatly appreciated. We really thank you for being here. You can find these projections and all our content at rotostreetjournal.com, where we breed and feed you fantasy wolves. You can find me at rotostreetwolf. I've been getting some DMs lately about the projections, some good comments from guys like Alan Cap, some great fans out there. Let me know what they think, where I'm crazy. It's so helpful. It makes me readjust. Sometimes I'll adjust if you bring up good points. Sometimes I might counter and say, this is where I'm thinking, but I just love hearing some insight, some feedback on what you guys think of the series, what you think of my projections overall. It's so greatly appreciated. I think that's about it. In a world full of fantasy sheep, I got to get to the dentist. So in a world full of fantasy sheep, go to your dentist and be a wolf. Later, guys.
Later.